Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome to this week's Q&A. There's no questions on the other platforms this week, so let's jump right into Patreon. First up is Mr. Pete 1985 and wants to know what's the proper way to neutralize the electrolytic fluid from a leaking capacitor. He said he read a few different things, most common being lemon juice or white vinegar or baking soda mixed with distilled water. I've heard a lot too. That's more of a question, I guess, for like Voltar and Jose, but I think what I've heard as well from the experts is vinegar, and then after scrubbing it with vinegar, then doing an alcohol bath. And what that means is taking, not just getting drunk and bringing it in the bath with you, taking something like this, a very high percentage alcohol content. And what I do is take one of those and I basically just pour a little alcohol over the board and scrub it with an electronics brush. I might have one right here. I do actually. So it's kind of like a toothbrush, but not. And I very specifically like using these, both because I don't have the visual, like the subconscious visualization of using my toothbrush to scrub these. I know it's a stupid thing to say, but I don't want to ever accidentally do that. So, and the bristles are kind of, they're hard enough, but not too hard. So unless you're overzealous, you're not going to pop any components off. So I think the vinegar is the good choice, but the alcohol bath's definitely one that I've been doing for a while. That was what I did when I got the roach-infested PS2 Slim, and also just there was occasionally I got PCBs that had some kind of funk on them, and maybe it was just dust that had settled for a million years in a warehouse, but there was just something about it that made me say, let me scrub this out just in case. I don't want any kind of thermal coating heating things up. I don't want anything conductive. So yeah, no matter what, whatever you use, make sure obviously whatever board you have is fully discharged. Then use vinegar and then scrub it with alcohol. And then I use compressed air. There's like plug-in air compressor things that you can get from Amazon for $50 that work great. They're almost as powerful as compressed air, not as much, which is probably better, so you don't have to worry about blowing something off. But I use those to really get it good, to make sure I can get under all the components to get as much of the isopropyl out. And then I leave it in the sun for a little bit. And preferably indoors, obviously, but outside of a window, because the UV rays would get out all of those last bits of moisture that are currently still evaporating that the air didn't. And there's always something, you gotta just treat it live, treat it like it's wet all the time. I tap the board out, then hit it with the air, tap it out again, then leave it, and then that's pretty much my full thing whenever I need to give an alcohol bath. So I've had good luck with that so far. I think it's safe to use the vinegar as long as you make sure to clean everything off afterwards, and then obviously don't plug it in until it's thoroughly dried and there's no chance of any kind of water droplets or moisture in there. Marco Vizzini had an excellent question that I do not have an answer to, so maybe anybody listening could help. But he has a PAL 27-inch CRT with RGB scarred input, and it works with both 50 Hz and 60 Hz games, but it only says 50 Hz on the rear sticker. So is it possible that running it at 60 Hz could damage that CRT? I don't think so. That's something that I would check elsewhere too. And check multiple sources just in case one of us is wrong. But I have a very awesome Brian Vega Algal TV sitting sort of over here. That it's the same scenario. It's a PAL TV that plays both PAL and NTSC perfectly through SCART. So 50 Hz and 60 Hz. But the other inputs, the analog inputs, are all PAL only. That's one project that if I ever have a free moment, I would love to strip that thing down, do the full conversion over to NTSC, and maybe make a video just for fun. But when I contacted Brian Vega about that, I needed to get the full the data sheets and everything to find which parts needed to be changed, and I told them what I was going to do, and they never mentioned that there would be a problem. And on top of that, the Sony PVMs I have will definitely use both 50 and 60 Hz. So I think you would be safe, but please double check because I don't want to give you the wrong info. Firebrand X wants to know if Barry Manilow knows that I raided his wardrobe. I don't get the joke. Did Barry Manilow get fat and only wear black shirts to make him look more svelte? If so, then sure, right away. Ken Wayne was following up on the Tesla Smart 16x1 HDMI switch that was talked about a few weeks back. And I guess he found out that it was the splitter he was using that didn't like the OSSC and not the switch itself. So that seems to be one that handles everything. So everything that's not 4K. Technically, you could do 4K 30, but most 4K games are probably going to be higher than that, or hopefully at least. So that's a good choice for people that need 16 inputs. I'm still looking for one switch that does it all. Minimum of 8 inputs, 2 outputs, as well as separating audio to both analog and digital. And I have that. It just doesn't output sound through the HDMI ports, and it doesn't handle OSSC over 4x. So, but mine was only 40 bucks, I think, and I believe this Tesla Smart one is 200. So if you're looking for a 16:1 switch, this is definitely a good choice, I guess. And I think Insurrection Industries is also doing their own HDMI switch test to make sure that the Carby is compatible. And if that's the case, maybe it could also be used with the OSSC. So if there's ever one switch to rule them all, I'll definitely make sure that everybody knows about it. Kyle Gamblin asked if the OSSC could help with PlayStation 1 games on a PlayStation 3 via component. So that's kind of tricky because Mark from My Life in Gaming seems to really like the way the PlayStation 3's backward compatibility works with the PS1 and likes the way the games look. And I would consider Mark one of the best sources to ask for something like that. I would normally completely trust his judgment, except on my CECH A01 PS3. So it's the PS2 backward compatible one. It's an original model, and it has been beat on, so I don't know if that has anything to do with it at all. But PS1 discs look terrible on it, just terrible. And the PS1 downloads of the same game, so like Symphony of the Night, that looks good, but when I did something like original PS1 or the PSONE, the PS1 Mini, when I put those through the OSSC on my OLED, it was night and day difference than the PS3 in 720, 1080, whatever resolution. So, I guess you would just have to try and see yourself. And I'm still really curious as to what Mark was seeing, because especially with something like PlayStation, his opinions are usually dead on correct. So I'm not sure what's going on with that. Maybe I just broke my PS3. Who knows? And same thing with PS2 on PS3. That's a possibility. But the things that you're going to have to remember, for PS1, the PS3 cannot do 240p. The lowest it can go is 480i. So if you're playing a 480i game through the PS3, through the OSSC, yeah, maybe there's something that you could do with that. But no matter what, I think you're going to get a better picture using original hardware through the OSSC. And same thing with the PlayStation 2. You're really only playing 480i and 480p games. Both My Life in Gaming and myself thought PS2 games looked pretty good through the PS3. I certainly didn't have any problems with it, especially not compared to PS1. The only issues that I did have is you're stuck using the original launch edition PS3, which unless you're lucky, they're so unreliable. You would have to really find a place where you could take a mint condition one, have them strip it all out, reball the GPU and CPU, replace the fan, maybe do a cap replacement because there's probably a lot of unnecessary heat in there at this point. And then you slap it all back together and you still have a big noisy PS3. So I think overall, if you're going to invest your money, you might want to, unless there's a very specific reason you want to use everything on a PS3, I would take that money and invest in a really good, like PS2 Slim, for example. And you could even have a mod chip installed so you could play backups, which is really important to me nowadays because while I really do own all the games that I actually play, but now almost every game that I play has some better patch. So for Symphony of the Night, there's the D-Dither patch that Chris Covell came up with. So even though I own the game, I still use a really nicely printed CDR on my Slim, and that takes care of PS1 and PS2 games really well. And once again, through the OSSC, now you can get some pretty awesome pictures through it. So I guess that's a really long answer to the question. There's no simple way to have said that, but I guess I would just stick with original hardware or one really nice PS2 to play both PS1 and PS2 games. Pablo Romero had a question about power. He has 220-volt power lines, but half of his consoles are 110 volts or 120, I guess, depending on where they're from. He has the cables labeled and connected to one voltage converter, but he still feels like there's a mistake waiting to happen. Me too, I feel the same exact way with my consoles. So he said, are there consoles with external power supplies that are the same on all regions? Can I just use a 220-volt PSU with them, and can a 1020-volt with internal PSU somehow be modded to work with 220 volts? So consoles with internal power supplies, Dreamcast, Saturn, I don't know, and I wouldn't be comfortable giving advice on it unless I really looked into it, because I certainly wouldn't want to give the wrong advice. But for consoles with the external bricks, Super Nintendo, Genesis, Nintendo, what I found was, especially PC Engine, any kind of Japanese console, instead of trying to use the original brick with a step-up or step-down converter, I've been using those power supplies that both Firebrand X, he recommends the triads, and Steve from HD Retrovision found the Power Plus, which those are even cheaper, but I guess 1 out of 100 comes broken, so, you know, whatever. But point being, I buy power supplies that are known to be good, that are designed for the wall that I plug it into, and are compatible with the console. So what you might want to try to look into is the same thing. Find yourself a good quality, good brand power brick that has the same DC pigtail as any of the consoles that you own. And that way you don't have to worry, because the wall side matches your region and the power that's going through it. The pigtail side, you know, the small port matches the voltage that your console needs. Because remember, the consoles would, you know, they'll take a swing of voltage. As long as there's enough amperage to keep up with it, it should be fine. And I think, in my opinion, that's what I have chosen to do, and I think that might be the safest. So, like, somebody gave me a Core Graphics and let me borrow a step-up converter with it. And I didn't even plug it in. I used the US PSU that has the correct voltage going to it, and I knew that it would be providing the right thing to the console. So that might be a safer way to do it. So see if maybe the Triad or maybe the Power Plus has 220 versions. That would actually make things pretty easy. Phil Welker had a good question, and one that I still struggle with myself. He said he barely knows anything about electronics, but enjoys the assembly and installation part of this hobby. He finds that when he's looking up certain mods, they say use a capacitor with a certain capacitance, voltage, and size, and that's it. But when he goes to order the part on Mauser or DigiKey or something, there's 20 other considerations, usually even more than that. Am I to assume that the remainder of these considerations are entirely irrelevant, or am I expected to figure out which ones are relevant and choose an appropriate component? So the very basics are, you need the capacitance to be exactly what it's supposed to be. The voltage could always be equal or higher, and higher meaning if you're replacing a capacitor that's 220 microfarad, 10 volt, you could put 10 volt, 12 volt, 1000 volt, doesn't matter at all as long as it's equal to or higher. And I tend to go higher just because why not, right? More protection, as long as as long as it's available, and certain size. So if you're buying surface mount components, especially for things like the triple bypass or even the SCART to DVI adapters, you're going to want to make sure to get the size exactly right. So 805, standard. Double check the height, which usually should be fine, but that one's kind of important. When you're going for a through hole, that's a little bit less important, but overall, yeah, you're right in most cases. It's just a matter of filtering through all of the different brands. Some of them are rated in tolerance levels, so and capacitors are always a higher tolerance than resistors. You can get 1% resistors really cheap. You can even get 0.01 or 0.1% resistors fairly less expensive, but capacitors you usually see more like 5, 10, 20%. So if it's something that's really important, like if you're designing a circuit or if you're just building something where people say make sure to get low tolerance, that's something that you would want to look into. Then there's heat ratings, how long they're supposed to be able to last, how many use hours, stuff like that. But generally speaking, especially for something easy like the SCART to DVI, I just picked the very basic specs, ordered them, and they just so happened to be correct. Just by, I think one wasn't. I think one was a little too big, but it still fit on the pad, and then Firebrand X made fun of me for it, so it was all worth it. We get a laugh. But I have ran into a few situations where that didn't work. One I caught. One when I was doing, just for fun, as a practice thing, I wanted to do a cap list for a 32X. Because Console 5 already has the cap kits. They're cheap and easy and really high quality. But I thought that that would have been a great system to practice making cap kits on. Because now I have something that I could reference. I already bought the Console 5 version. And there's one there that doesn't quite look like the other caps. So that's when I stopped and asked some of my friends, hey, what's up with this one? It says the same markings as the other, but it looks different. And that's when they said, oh, that's a special kind. You need to order this specifically. And there were no markings on the cap for me to look up a part number. So it just so happened to be that I talked to fellow nerds that knew what they were doing. And there were other times where I didn't catch it at all. I put the bill of materials together, and then I asked friends to check it over for me, which is tedious, let me tell you. So if you're a friend and I have asked you to check out a bomb for me, I know what I'm asking, and I am sorry. But then it's been, no, man, there's 20 here, and you got 5 of them wrong. Here's what you need to do. Here's the difference. And I don't quite understand what I got wrong in those scenarios. So I think the best advice that I could give is that if it's an easy project, then just order it and see what happens. If it's a more important project, see if there's already cap kits out there. See if somebody's posted a list. There's one site, octopart.com, where if you punch in the part number, it tells you what other stores have them in stock. And you could buy it directly through there. So if you're making cap kits or cap lists at least, maybe try to use something like that so people could order easily. But I wish I had more, and this might even be one of those things where the more I learn, the harder it would be to answer, because of those things that I didn't get. Maybe each one of those was a very specific scenario. So if you're doing the basic stuff, just go for it and see. If you're doing a big project or something that really should be perfect, like a rare console that you're recapping that doesn't have a cap kit available, reach out to people that are at least intermediate to expert, maybe not necessarily experts, because it's very often that a lot of these times people just did the wrong thing themselves, figured out the right thing, and now they know the answer. So I wish there was a much less complicated way to answer that, but that's just what I do, and luckily there's a lot of awesome people in the retro gaming scene that are willing to help. Nick Furlow said that he had some questions about Extron crosspoint matrix switches. He read through the manual for his Ultra 84 and noticed it has a lot more features than he realized. He wants to know if I have any favorite features or presets, and have I ever experimented with controlling it from a PC or a web GUI, and how do you mess with, what's up with the dip switches. So to be honest, my favorite thing about the Extron crosspoints is they just work. Just the fact that there's a switch where as long as you get the dips correctly on them, it can pass RGBS, RGBHV, component videos, sync on green. It just works. That you would be shocked at how many things over the years I've tested that don't even do the basic things that they're supposed to do. So those are the things that I've always loved about the crosspoints. Also, just keep in mind, dip switches might differ depending on each model. There's a bunch of little weird quirks, so just make sure to read the manual for your model. But to answer the direct question, no, I've never tried controlling it from a PC or phone or something. Ken Wayne had posted links to 2 different projects that look amazing. And the only thing that I would suggest is if you have a stationary setup. So you're somebody where you got your favorite consoles, they're built into the wall, nice shelves and stuff like that, and you have all of these things wired, then yeah, I would love to have something like that, some kind of cool touchscreen controller where you just press Super Nintendo optical out and everything already changes for you. I think that would be amazing. But my personal setup, not only do I not have enough space to do it, but none of my consoles stay in the same place for more than days, because it's always grabbing something, testing something, plugging something in a different way. And every single time I spent the time to meticulously OCD wire everything so it was perfect. You couldn't see the wires, everything was nice. It looks like all those awesome setups people post. Within 2 weeks, it was all disassembled again for another project. So no, for me, I'm trying to get a secondary setup going so I could just press play and go, but or press on and go. But for now, no, I'm still pretty much a couple consoles through a G-SCART and then the rest direct connecting, just because it's how it rolls when you have to do all this extra stuff. So if you have a stationary setup, yeah, I think it's worth the time and the money to make one of these configurations, tailor it exactly to your needs, and you only have to change it if you do some kind of major upgrade, because even if you pull your SNES out and put a different mod in it or something, that wouldn't change the setup. You just got to remove the console for a minute. So yeah, I like those. I'd love to see one in action one day and mess with it, but I don't even have a cross point in the apartment anymore. I just use the G-SCARTs and direct connects just for the reasons I just listed. BusterD was asking about where to get pieces of acrylic printed the same way that you would take like a 3D print design and have that printed from someplace like Shapeways. Well, there's a place out there where if you already have the design, it's called Ponoko.com, Ponoko. And that's one that I use to print out the comp to DVI shell. I believe MrAddons.com is getting their own laser cutter too for acrylic, so that if there's a really great design that somebody has, maybe they'd be willing to help. But I do have kind of a few thoughts on that. So you had mentioned that the only place that you found was a place called High Flow in the Netherlands, and I had bought my Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3 board from them, and I was incredibly unimpressed. You'll notice the hole for the heatsink had to be recut because the heatsink was too tall and it was actually hitting the plexi. You can't quite see because it was repaired, but the holes didn't line up, so some of the standoffs were at an angle which kind of bent the arcade board. But one thing overall about plexis that I've been seeing, and there's nothing you could do about it, certainly not anything that was wrong with the high flow ones. But let me see if you could see it, if I can get this on camera. So if you could see in between the two posts, the circuit board, the motherboard itself, is, there you go, you can kind of see it, is kind of flexing in the middle. It's kind of just hanging down because of the weight over just years of being a board. And remember that these things were originally mounted on the side like this. So while there was pressure put on them, it wasn't, it was really only on the mounting posts. So I guess I'd like to see a few things. I'm never buying anything from High Flow again because it was really expensive. It took over a month to arrive. It didn't line up. And on top of that, when I posted pictures of it on Twitter, I get a lot of messages both on Twitter publicly and privately of people that had similar stories from High Flow. So I'm not the only one. But my thought on that is if you can get just a cheap acrylic, just for the point of preventing shorts, that would be awesome. I would love to have people just put up measurements of their board and make something thin and cheap that really only has the intent of no shorts. But I think a better option might be something like if we could, maybe you could do this with acrylic actually, but whatever's the cheapest possible way of having something that the board sits on top of that's non-conductive. So maybe it's a piece of acrylic where you take some kind of sticky rubber, so the bottom half is sticky, put that over the acrylic, and have mounting holes so that there's a little bit of pressure on the bottom of the board from the rubber just to keep everything even. So the sides that are more heavily weighted than the other, like the side with the heatsink, so that puts even pressure on it. And that's really what I would like to see. I haven't seen anybody do anything like that yet. It could definitely be done on plexi. I think a better thing might be a 3D print, but the real goal is the most inexpensive way to mount an arcade board that distributes weight properly so you don't have to worry about sagging and stuff like that. Because when a board sags, you're basically taking something that's 30 years old with old solder on it, it's been heated and cooled, And now when you're bending it, you're bending all of those solder points and everything else. So while it might not crack or kill the motherboard, you might have to reflow a bunch of the chips and everything. So having it all exactly even would be better. So I don't really know how to do any of that. I just, that's the answer to your question, but there's no way for me personally to make it happen. So if anybody out there has the ability to, if you know how to measure out and go to Pinocchio and make plexi like that, the only suggestion with Pinocchio is I believe the more cuts and angles and stuff you have written on it, that will all raise the cost significantly. Whereas just like when I say thin, you know, it's still a strong but thin piece of plexi with mounting holes only is fairly inexpensive. Maybe somebody could make one of those, measure out something for, I could send measurements for Mortal Kombat 1 and 3 if anybody's interested, and have it so that there's some kind of mounts. You bolt it down, but when you're bolting it down, it's just holding the board in place from slipping off. The pressure is really on some kind of rubber or any non-conductive surface. And you know, I know there's a heat factor involved, but I think the heat mostly rises off the top of these boards, so I don't think that would be as big of a deal. But anybody have any thoughts on that? That could turn into an idea. Heck, anybody wants to contact MrAddons.com if he really does have a new laser cutter. Maybe there's a cool side business. Get some designs done for some rubber padded, some kind of really good bottoms for arcade boards so people could bring them around and not have to worry about shorts or bending the board. Ghetto Bill Gates had a question about the cheap LCD TV video that I just posted. He wants to know if any of them would accept PAL signals through the OSSC. I'm not sure. The only time I've tested PAL signals through the OSSC was on a Samsung TV like yours and a Panasonic Plasma, and both refused it. I don't have any PAL equipment with me now, or any, I don't even think I have a dual outputting thing, so I really have no way to answer that. Sorry. If anybody else knows the answer or has one of those they could test, please post down below. Mitch Bowling had an interesting one. He said he has a question on elevator pitches, you know, being able to explain something in less than a minute. How do you do that with retro RGB? He's doing a panel next week in North Carolina and has a hard time explaining it all in short time frames. So I do agree. What I usually do is I have my overview of how this all works and why that you would want to look into any of this other stuff. And I definitely can't do it in a minute, but I usually get it to a point where if somebody is going to come to a panel that I'm talking at, I know I have them for at least a few moments before I lose their interest. So I don't get too technical, but I try to give the whole overview of here's what the best is, here's how you're aiming to get it, and then here's shortcuts that are good enough. So I essentially try to make the whole point of RGB is the best in old consoles because that's how the video was originally generated in most cases. I also talk about lag, display lag, as well as emulation lag, briefly. And then things like how monitors interpret signal different. So sometimes I go into 480i versus 240p, but it's really just an overview case. And I haven't really done one of those where I lost everybody. The main overviews for me usually 5-ish minutes, and then depending on what panel I'm doing, whatever else, then I go from there. But usually people get it, and it's, they get where I'm going with it, and then I kind of feel out different levels of both interest and skill when I see the looks on people's faces when I say certain things. And I mean that respectfully, by the way. Some people that don't know anything about this have come to the panels and at the end come up to me afterwards and gone, thanks, I didn't know any of this. This is awesome. Now I know where to start. So the 1-minute pitch for retro RGB is people that want to get the best experience from a retro gaming console and be caught up with everything going on in the retro gaming scene and be able to apply that to their needs. So for some people, the best might just be, I have an entire collection of games for these consoles. I don't have a lot of money. Here's my TV. What do I do? And the answer is always, here's your budget. What's your budget? Let me point you in the right direction, type of thing. But the elevator pitch and the goal of the site has absolutely changed. When I first started this as a Google Doc, it was how do I play Super Metroid the best way humanly possible. And it's definitely going to be, at least at that time, on original hardware. So where do we go from there? but I've really started to realize as time goes on that everybody's situation's different, and the best for everybody will be different. Heck, Firebrand X is probably pounding his hands on the table right now, you know, going, yeah, but make sure you talk about audio levels, and you know, it's just, I mean that lovingly, of course, because it's you know, some people the best is, hey, how come when I have this solution from Hyperkin and I press this button, it takes like a second for Mario to jump, but when I use one of the solutions that you recommended that's a little more expensive, I push the button and Mario jumps right away. To that person, that's the best solution for them that they need, and I love that, and I love being able to help with that now. So if you figured out a better 1-minute elevator pitch, write it out and send it to me and I'll memorize it. But that the whole, you know, Retro RGB is now a site designed for people to be able to get kept in the loop of everything going on in the retro gaming scene and help them get the best out of their old consoles for their situation. Or, yeah, for their situation, their setup, whatever else. So it's even less than a minute. But great question. And, you know, if I'm always open to do panels. I kind of said last year, I just don't have the budget to go to all of these trade shows. And maybe I just need a marketing person to take care of this for me. But if I'm asked to speak at one of these, and at the very least given a free pass to get in, I'll try to make it over to go. I was going to a bunch of these, and it just was spending a lot of money getting to and from and going to, and didn't have a place to go or something to organize. And you know, after I'd find out, or after I left, I'd get contacted by people like, "Oh, I wish you knew you were coming. You could have done a panel with me." So I just feel like maybe I need a marketing person to help me take care of all this stuff. But I would love to go to these panels and do as much as I can. I just need a little bit of help. You know, get me a ticket, get me there, get me a reason to go there. I'd love to do these things. Hope that didn't come off in the wrong way. I mean it positively. I just you know, got a lot of things to juggle, so I want to make sure to use my time as wisely as possible. But good luck in North Carolina. Well, I thought this was going to be a short one because there was only 12 questions, but it looks like I've found a way to ramble on for a half hour. So if anybody has any questions or suggestions or feedback for these, please post wherever you found this video. And, you know, feedback is always appreciated. I've asked the question a few times, do you want these Q&As to go longer? Do you want me to just shut up and answer the question? And generally, every time I've asked that, people have said, no, this isn't the weekly roundup. We're asking a question. We really want the answer. So to be honest, I'm cool with whatever anybody wants. I'm very appreciative of the support that I get, and I'm very happy to help. So as long as these longer explanations aren't boring everybody to death, I'll just keep doing the same thing I've been doing. For any newcomers, please post any questions at all that you have for next week wherever you found this video. So whether it's the YouTubers creative channel, I don't even know what they're calling that officially, Patreon, Subscribestar, Bitbacker, whatever, wherever you found this video or the newest video on that platform, please post your question there. Because of the way things are set up, it's really impossible for me to go back to previous weeks and try to figure out what any of the newer questions are. So please just keep it all in these. And also, if I missed your question, it's almost surely because it came in right after I started recording, or sometimes these segments get deleted. It's happened a few times this year, and I'm still not really sure how that went down. So please, if you asked a question that did not get answered, please just re-ask it, and I'll be very happy to help. You know, some things just get messed up sometimes. But most importantly, thank you all so much for your support. I couldn't do any of this without you, couldn't do any of the behind-the-scenes stuff without you, which, man, I keep saying this, but there's a few things coming out that I'm so excited to get there, but there's just a few delays, and which is another reason I'm glad nobody announced anything, because technically it's not a delay if it's not an officially announced product yet. So a lot of exciting stuff coming up this year, and I've been lucky enough to get a bunch of help, so maybe I could even help push some other products through as well. But I'm excited. I'm a retro nerd, and I love playing all these things. Hopefully all of you are too, and I'll see you next week.